Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and today I'm doing my August wrap-up. This month I read a total of 10 books. I'm sure most of you guys are aware of this, but BookTube-A-Thon happened at the very beginning of this month, and I did participate in it. I didn't post any videos just because I didn't have the time to post videos. I was just mainly focused on getting reading done. I read a total of 3.5 books during BookTube-A-Thon, and I'm going to go more into detail about the 3.5 thing. The first book that I read in August was the first book that I finished in BookTube-A-Thon, and that book is Partials by Dan Wells. I've had this book on my TBR for such a long time, and I have finally finished this book, which I am so happy about. In this book, there has been a partials war, and partials are described as engineered organic beings that are identical to humans, and they have decimated the population. There was a virus that they used, and it has killed off a lot of people, and every time a baby is born, they end up dying because of this virus. The main character, Kira, is 16 years old. She's a medic in training, and she decides she wants to find a cure for the virus, which is called RM. This was a really enjoyable sci-fi read. It was interesting to read about how partials were different than the humans, but I kind of wanted to know more about how they were created. I wish there was more world building because it wasn't really explained what started the partials war in the first place. When Kira was experimenting to find the cure for RM, I thought that was really interesting to read about. I'm really interested in the medical stuff. I don't want to be a doctor or anything, but I think it's really interesting and fascinating. I was really into Grey's Anatomy, and I just liked seeing all the hospital doctors saving lives stuff. I liked how Kira was willing to risk her own life to save the lives of the future generation. Although it did get kind of annoying because Kira wanted to save everybody. Even people who just had no chance couldn't be saved. She wanted to stop everything she was doing and save them, even though she's being chased. Kira's very determined about what she believes in. While I didn't love the side characters, I really respected them and loved how they were willing to help Kira throughout the story. There is romance in this book, but it wasn't a major focus of the story. I have a feeling that the romance is really going to change in the next book. I'm not going to say specifically why, but I do have a feeling that it's really going to change. Although Kira does have a boyfriend right from the beginning of the story, she is really focused on trying to save the world. This is a pretty long book, and some parts did drag a little. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but before BookTube-A-Thon started, I was already halfway through the book, and I finished the other half during BookTube-A-Thon. Overall, I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a really good, solid read. The next book that I read is Take Me On by Katie McGarry. This is the 4th book in the Pushing the Limits companion series. This book follows Haley and West. West is a character that showed up in the 3rd book, which is called Crashed Into You. Okay, so when I was on page 455 of the story, which is the very last page of the story, I thought that there was more. As you can see, this is where 455 is, and you can see that there's a lot more pages left, so I thought that there was going to be a lot more. But when I turned the page, this is what happened. Acknowledgements. Because the rest of this is a novella from Pushing the Limits, and I was like, no, I wanted to read more. Even though it was a pretty long book, I really wanted to read more after the story has ended. When it always comes to contemporary books, I always want to read a little more of the story once the couple gets together, you know? So anyways, I love this book. I don't know if it's because it's the most recent book that I read in the series, but I really loved Haley and West. I think they're my favorite couples so far in the series. I love them both together, and I love them both individually. Aside from the whole fighting conflict that both characters face with another character in the story, their overall story just felt really real to me. Every time I talk about a Katie McGarry book, I always talk about the characters because she writes wonderful characters who have such real background stories. Even though both characters have a problem together, they individually have problems that they have to deal with at home as well. And these characters' problems at home just feel really real because what they're facing at home are issues that happen to people in real life. I loved the romance, no surprise there. I loved seeing their relationship develop, and I loved how Haley knew how to kickbox. I loved how Wes was always saying to Haley that she's worth fighting for. They just make my heart melt, and I love them together. And yeah, I don't know if it's just because it's the most recent book in the series, but I think this is my favorite, so highly recommend the series. 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is Daughter of Deep Silence by Carrie Ryan. I'm not going to give a synopsis of this book, but it does have to do with revenge. I really liked the revenge aspect in the story, but I didn't really like the romance in here. It was really frustrating, and honestly I just didn't care about the romance. It really felt like insta love to me, and the romance kind of reminded me of the romance in The Wrath in the Dawn. The main character really hated the main love interest but then grew to love him. I'm usually all for like romances that start with hate but grows into love, but this just didn't work for me. But luckily it wasn't like a major focus of the story, and the character was like really set on the revenge. Didn't love this book, didn't hate it, ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, and I'm so happy that I read this book because if you've been watching my videos for a while, I've had this book on my TBR for so long. I've mentioned this book in the books I wanted to read in 2015, and I mentioned it in my summer TBR, and I thought I would never get to it, but I just decided to go for it during BookTube-A-Thon, and I ended up pleasantly surprised. I went into this book with super low expectations. By super low expectation, I thought I was going to end up giving this book a 1 out of 5 stars. Then I ended up being pleasantly surprised, which I am so happy about. I'm just so happy that I am done with this trilogy. I'm not the biggest fan of this trilogy, but I made the effort to read the first 2 books, so I thought I might as well finish this last book. I really like how fast-paced this book was, and I loved where the storyline was going. I did read a recap of the first 2 books on a website called recaptains.blogspot.com, so it basically summarized what happened in the first 2 books. Even though I forgot who half of the characters were, I really liked the side characters. I thought they had a really great group dynamic, they worked together really well, and I loved seeing them interact with one another. I remember that there were a few characters that I didn't like in the previous books, but I ended up really liking in this book. Overall, I am pretty satisfied with how things ended, and I give this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Ruin and Rising was the last book that I read for BookTube-A-Thon. To recap my reading pages during BookTube-A-Thon, I read 1,492 pages during BookTube-A-Thon, which I think is pretty good, especially since 2 of the books were books that I've had on my TBR for a really long time. The next book that I read is Stone Cold Touch by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book in the Dark Elements trilogy. This trilogy has to do with gargoyles, and our main character Layla is half warden, which is another term for gargoyle. She's half warden and half demon. The wardens basically protect the humans from demons. So beware, going into this trilogy, there is going to be a love triangle. The love triangle was really frustrating in this book specifically. Some of the steamy romance scenes were so awkward and cringeworthy, aka all the scenes including Zane. Aside from that, I did like this book more than I did with the first book. There were several like, oh my god, what just happened moments in this book. It was a fun and quick read, but the ending though, oh my god, I did not see the ending coming, and I can't believe I didn't see it coming because there were a lot of hints throughout the story regarding that ending. I give this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I also read the last book this month, which is called Every Last Breath. I'm not going to say anything about the last book because it's the last book, and I feel like anything I say will be a spoiler, so all I'm going to say is that I give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This book has been described as the Hunger Games on Mars. There are some aspects that are similar to the Hunger Games, but I really don't see it as the Hunger Games, but it does take place on Mars. I read this book for Bookbusters, which is the read-along group that I'm a part of, and if it weren't for this book being selected, I would probably have DNF'd it, but I pushed through. There was so many new terminology in this book that I did not understand whatsoever, and even after reading this book, there is still lots of words that I still don't understand. Sometimes I'm okay with not knowing the terminology in this book because it gets explained later on. But with this book, you're basically thrown into this world and you're like expected to know what's going on. Just within the first chapter, there was 20 words that were introduced that I had no clue what they meant. And it just really annoyed me that I didn't know. It was too much and it made it really difficult to get into this book. I wish there was some sort of glossary in the front or back of the book, and like some sort of like chart regarding all the colors in the society, because people in the society are divided by colors. Red is like the lowest color, I believe, and gold is like the highest. The beginning of this book was so slow. Honestly, I had no idea what was happening for a majority of the book. I don't know if it's just me. I just didn't know what was going on. It was just a confusing mess because the writing was really hard for me to follow. I didn't have high expectations going to this book, but I also didn't have low expectations. But yeah, as you can tell, I ended up pretty disappointed, and I give this book a 1 out of 5 stars. I don't rate books 1 out of 5 stars that often, but this is the first 1 out of 5 star rating that I've given to a book this year. Yeah, definitely not going to pick up the next book, and definitely will never reread this book. This was just like a major rant about me not liking this book. The next book that I read is a book that I actually listened to as an audiobook, and that book is The Iron Trial by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black. The Magisterium is basically a place where kids learn how to use their magical abilities, and Call, which is the main character, has been told by his father all his life to fail the test when it is time for him to take it, because being in the Magisterium will lead to bad things. And so when Call takes the test, he fails it, but surprisingly, he still gets picked to get into the Magisterium. I really like this world. Yes, it does have that magical aspect that Harry Potter has, but it does have its own unique twist to it. The main character did annoy me at times. He makes a lot of decisions without thinking it through. I really liked the friendship that he had with Aaron and Tamara. I liked how they didn't instantly click as friends. It took them a while. They grew to know each other before they actually became good friends. And there is something that happens towards the end that I was really surprised about, and I do plan on continuing this series, although it's not a priority of mine to read the next book immediately when it releases. I rate this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is one of my favorites that I read this month, and that book is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. Before I talk about this book, I want to say that I've read Jandy Nelson's previous book, which is The Sky is Everywhere, and I did not like that book. I gave that book a 1 out of 5 stars. But I've heard so many great things about I'll Give You the Sun. I want to thank Anushka because she bought me this book for my birthday, and if it weren't for her, I probably would have never actually purchased this book myself. But thank you to Anushka for buying this book, and because she bought it, I owned a copy, and so I read it. And I was like, oh my god, this book is great. This book follows a pair of twins who used to be really close, but then events happened that led them to drift apart. I loved the dual POVs switching from different timelines. Although I do have to say that I wish the chapters weren't as long as they were in this book. Sometimes I would get tired of reading from one person and would prefer to read from the other person. If I had to pick a favorite POV, mine would for sure be Noah. I just loved him. I loved reading his story. It gave me all the feels. Their characters just felt so real to me, and I just truly connected to them. Everything they felt, I felt as well. The ending was a bit rushed, and I really, really wanted more with that ending, especially coming from Noah's side. And if you read this book, you know why I want more of Noah. This book is like a 4.25, 4.5 out of 5 rating. I love this book. Highly recommend if you haven't read it yet. And the last book that I read in August is Finding Audrey by Sophie Kinsella. This book follows Audrey, who is 14 years old, and she suffers an anxiety disorder. She wears sunglasses because she can't make eye contact with people. I like how this book was about mental illness, but it also was pretty lighthearted at the same time. I really like the whole family dynamic. Audrey's brother Frank is constantly video gaming, and he reminds me a lot of my brother, whose name is Franklin. Franklin? So that was really weird. When I first realized that, I was like, oh my god, Frank really reminds me of my brother, because my brother is constantly on the computer. With Frank and his video gaming, it was pretty entertaining to read about at first, but then it was constantly being brought up, and then I just got tired reading about it. I've never experienced or know someone who has experienced an anxiety disorder, so I can't really answer about how well it's portrayed in the story. I wanted to know more about what happened to Audrey that led her to develop the anxiety disorder. It was brushed over in the story, and readers weren't provided anything specific about what happened. Linus is the love interest in the story, and I loved he was like a support system for Audrey and not someone who fixes her because she falls in love with him. Falling in love doesn't cure mental illness. More of all the support she gets from her family, her therapist, and the effort she puts in to get better, and I love that. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. While I did enjoy this book, it just wasn't something that I was really into. That is the end of my August wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!